to have you. Thank you for giving us a few minutes of your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to hear everything that you are going to be talking about for the Faith and Work LA event that's focused on creatives. But um, as in the work that we do with Together LA, which is a new nonprofit that just recently relaunched here in LA. Our goal at Together LA is to really bring Christian business leaders, Christian artists, Christian pastors, nonprofit leaders around this sort of central question, which is how do we love and serve the city of LA well? Anyone who has lived here, like even just for 5 seconds, knows that there's a ton of opportunity, but there's also a lot of brokenness here in the city and a lot of challenges. And so I would love to hear your thoughts about, from your perspective as a creator, as a creative, as a writer, how do you see yourself sort of fitting into that narrative of, yes, I'm a writer, I'm a creative, and yes, this is also how I see the arts sort of serving in that area.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is in journalism. I spent 7 years at a magazine it was a secular magazine. And I remember when I was in church, I would sit and hear the pastors kind of talking about how creativity and your vocation all kind of intersect. And I would think a lot about how I didn't really understand how journalism. I mean, like looking back on it, this is kind of a stupid thought. But like I was like, I don't understand how journalism has anything to do with like my faith or my like how the Lord will sort of like play out in that vocation. I work at a secular magazine. I don't really get to choose the stories I'm writing. But the Lord was so faithful in my personal job situation where I had coworkers who were extremely open and thoughtful about the fact that I was a believer, even though none of them were, and they were extremely willing to listen to my point of view on things, and slowly building that sort of relationship with them, where they were like. Willing to have conversations, and they would ask me like, curious. They were curious. They were interested. They knew that I went to church every Sunday, and they were kind of like, wait, there are churches in Los Angeles? I was like, yeah, that's a thing. Kind of led to it gave me the agency sort of later on in my career to pitch stories that had a more sacred approach to them, and so. If a book came out by a Christian author, I might have pitched a story on it and gotten to write about it, or getting to write. We did, an issue about sex in Los Angeles, and I pitched a story about people who aren't having sex in Los Angeles. And I was amazed when they were like, "Yeah, sure." And I was like, "Okay, now I actually have to write this." Yeah, and so the way I kind of see it playing out in my work specifically. Is that kind of concept of having a platform and a voice and being able to just like listen for the Lord and wait on Him for the sorts of opportunities where, words make a difference. I find that the things you say, the things you write, the things people are reading, obviously, as we know, can kind of craft how people think.
Right.
And I felt it was a responsibility of mine to kind of listen for the Lord and see if I could inject something faith-based into my work wherever I could. It wasn't all the time. It was, it was like few and far between at a secular magazine, but it was enough to where it felt like I could make an impact on the city in some small way based on what I was writing. Or even if it was a secular topic, but that required something like a faith-based approach. The principles of the topic were kind of rooted in a faith system. For example, like handling the homelessness crisis here. It was interesting to be able to write about that, having a knowledge of Christianity and faith, and like how the Lord would want to treat the homeless, and this sort of thing. Being able to write about these sorts of things from that perspective is kind of how I saw faith and vocation sort of intersecting in that way.
I love one thing that you said, even just initially, is just how working in a secular environment, how your colleagues were very curious, and I think that says a lot about you as a person and your character. to be in a place like that, and just the importance of actually just living it out and living out your faith, and not necessarily having to put words behind it. Those obviously come, and those are super important, but you lived it out first.
Yeah, it was nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
Also, because literally nobody else in my office was a believer, and you know, there's that quote, I think it's by St. Francis of Assisi, that's like, preach the gospel at all times, when necessary, use words.
Yep, exactly.
And it's kind of like, it was really, I talked to the pastor in my church about it for a while when I was a little bit younger in my career, about that's, you know, stepping out in boldness, and even pitching that story on chastity for that sex issue or whatever it was. What was an exercise in sort of stepping out in boldness. And I remember when it first came to the fore that I was like, anytime anybody found out I was a Christian, I almost like felt like I was keeping a secret. They would find out and they'd be like, wait, you're a Christian, but you're so normal. And I was like,
I love that.
What a huge bummer that the only Christians you've come across in your life are not normal apparently.
Exactly.
But it was a cool way to kind of like sort of rewrite that narrative, that whatever, you know, they might have, whatever perceptions they might have had of, you know, believers in the past, it was kind of cool to be, you know, in a teeny tiny little like microcosm, sort of like rewriting that narrative for people. And I hope I did the Lord justice as I was doing that. But yeah, it was a really interesting, but really also just super gratifying experience to be able, like, I ended up having some really great theological conversations with some of my coworkers, not to the point where any of them, you know, became saved or anything like that, but just like the fact that we were having those conversations was, I mean, I got to pray for one of my coworkers when she was going through a really hard time, and this woman's not even a believer, you know what I mean? It was a very cool situation.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking a little bit of time
my
and
pleasure.
sharing your thoughts about it. We're so grateful and
Absolutely.
excited to hear more from you tonight.
For sure. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.